Hello, this video will help you to learn how to find samples and how to use a software sampler to create your own sampler instrument. Now, for King by Years and Years, there are a few things that you need to have organised before you start to do this. Number one is in your project, or somewhere written down, you should have listed out the main parts of the piece. This video will focus on drum kit and percussion, as they are rhythm parts. You also need to make sure that you have written out your structure, which is up top. To do this, you can use your loop tool to left click and drag there, and then drag down to create a marker. Then you right click and rename. You've also got this square over here, and this sets the end of the project. So if you drag it back to the beginning of bar 93 or the end of 92, then you'll have the end of your project and you'll know to go no further. So with regards to making your own drum kit, what you need to be able to do is first to identify sounds that you think match well with the original stimulus, and in order to do that you need to listen to it. So what I've done here is I've loaded up an example of a kit on the Ultrabeat sampler, and I found a kick drum that I quite like the sound of. Quite hard, not too boomy, quite clicky, which matches nicely with the original. Now, there are other elements about that sampler that perhaps don't match with the original stimulus, and I just want this kick drum. So what I need to do is I need to find that sample. To do that on Ultrabeat, I need to double click to open the sampler. I then need to left click here to show that in Finder. That gives me that exact audio file, and if I press spacebar on that to preview, you get the kick drum sound that you want. So now that you've found your sample, you need to copy that, and you need to go to your own project folder, so wherever that might be saved. I would then make a folder called samples, and then you would paste that into that folder. Now you can see that I've found some of my own samples already. I have renamed them, so you won't be able to find these exact audio files if you search for them in Logic. So if perhaps you found a sample that was stored on EXS24, this is a little different. So you open the sampler, you click on the edit button, it then shows you all the samples and all their associated velocities. Now the difference between the Ultrabeat and EXS24 samplers really is the interface and the overview of how you can view samples. The EXS24 gives you a lot more creative control over layering samples and also determining the volume or the velocity at which will be played. For instance, if I select a hi-hat on F#1, if I play at different velocities, it will select different samples. So if you wanted a heavier hi-hat hit at a higher velocity, that would be that sample, whereas something quieter would be there. Once you've found the sample that you're after, you left click on this drop down button and you reveal in Finder. And again, it's a case of right clicking, copying, and then right clicking on your folder and pasting in. When you've collected all of your samples, in order that you get going on your sampling and your input of MIDI data, I would recommend that you make use of the Ultrabeat drag and drop sample preset. So if you create a new software instrument, under the input, select Ultrabeat drum synth in stereo. That will open up a new Ultrabeat. Under the presets menu, go to drum kits and then go to drag and drop samples. At this stage, you'll be presented with a clean slate, as it were. You can then click on Finder, open up your sample list, and then you can begin to drag and drop in samples to each key of the sampler. So for example, if we start with the kick drum, you'd left click and select that and drag that and drop that into this window here. Then when I play that, it gives me the kick drum sound. Now there are a few things that I can do to that once it's imported. I can change the level. I can mute it. I can change the panning. I can also change the EQ. And I can also change the envelope shape. And now at this stage I would recommend that you leave the shape of the samples as you found them, because they are sounds that you have identified as being most faithful to the original stimulus. When you've dragged and dropped in all of your samples, you should end up with a custom made sampler instrument that has all of your particular parts. Now at the moment what I haven't done is labelled each of the individual keys. So if I did that, I double click, type enter, and then there I have my kick drum. Once you've done that, you can then actually move on to inputting the MIDI data for the track. Now when you are doing this, I'd recommend that you work in perhaps regions of 4 or 8 bars, in order that you can make use of copy and paste facilities in Logic. Now this will be easier to do if you're working with similar sections. However, as you notice, there are some differences in terms of the sounds that play in similar sections. There are some sections, however, like choruses, that do look much the same. A few tips for when you're inputting your data. Be sure to make use of velocity. To view velocity, click lists, and you'll see on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, you have numbers ranging from 1 through to 127, 1 being your quietest or your coldest, and 127 being your loudest and your hottest colours. I would also recommend that you look into, or that you listen carefully for the quantization of rhythm. So some parts are played in 16ths and have quite straight rhythms. So if we open up Ultrabeat and we solo the triangle part, if I can find it, if I zoom in, you can see that these parts have very clearly been quantized to a 16th note. To contrast with this, there are some parts that ought to be quantized with a slight swing. So that we hear what this does, I'm just going to remove that solo from there. Select these two hi-hat notes and quantize them with a 16C swing. That will push this note slightly to the right. Now for the beginning part of the song, it may not be accurate. Certainly for later sections, for example the chorus, the hi-hat does need some quantization. The effect of which is that it gives the hi-hat a swing feel or a dotted feel as opposed to a straight feel. When you are ordering your samples, it would be wise to keep things like your kick and snare at the initial parts of your sampler. Claps can go somewhere between your snare. You can then move on to hi-hats, triangle, both muted and sustained, ride cymbal, crash, castanets, and cabassa. Bear in mind as well that it would be wise to make use of the EQ function within Ultrabeat for each sample in order that you can control the EQ of each individual part, and then therefore not have to use a channel EQ to do all of your EQ or separate EQs to the whole track. A few other tips before I finish. As I've mentioned, work in sections of 4 to 8 bars. Be careful that when you end sections that they end exactly at the ends of bars and that they don't drag over. Be careful as well that if you are playing parts in, that they don't sound too out of time, or that if you've quantized parts, that they don't sound too robotic. By adding a 16C swing to hi-hat parts, it can generally make it sound a lot more humanized. However, there are functions that enable you to humanize data to make it sound human. If you select all of your data within a region, go to Functions, Transform, and Humanize, you can set parameters that randomize the position, the velocity, and the length of notes. This randomization will not impact too severely in this example, as the value is particularly low. But if I select Operate Only, you should notice that the position, the colour, and the length of notes changes very slightly randomly for each of these MIDI notes. The resulting impact is something that sounds apparently a little more human. Versus which sounds a lot more robotic and quantized. For more tips about sampling and samplers, you can search for additional videos about Ultrabeat and also about the EXS24 if you want to make use of additional features. Thank you very much for watching. Enjoy sampling.